Welcome to the Multilateral Institutions Research Cluster event today. For our speaker, Georgios, it's the evening. For the rest of us, it's lunchtime. Georgios, thanks very much for taking the time out at the end of your day to be able to join us. I will briefly introduce Georgios, and then I will hand it straight over to you to speak. Georgios and I are old friends, although I don't count either of us as old, but we've been friends for some length of time, and I'm very happy to have the chance to engage with him today. Georgios and I knew each other, worked when he was doing a lot of work with the UN. Back in the early 90s and mid 90s, he served on UN field missions in South Africa, Mexico, Haiti, and Bosnia. And I've read some really interesting work that he's done from that time. In the start of the new millennium, he worked at the UN headquarters in New York, amongst other things, as Senior Program Officer in the Secretary General's Climate Change Support Team, and as a Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change for the Secretariat of the UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination. He was Senior Policy Advisor for the UN with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, and First Officer in the Strategic Planning Unit in the Executive Office of the UN Secretary General. In 2010 to 2012, he served in the Secretariat of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Global Sustainability as Senior Advisor and Acting Deputy Executive Secretary. So Georgios has worked with, for, and under both Secretary General Kofi Annan and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. So he has a great deal of experience there. Also extensive experience as an academic in teaching various programs. But he's now based in Brussels, but looking forward to an opportunity to go and see his family in Greece at some point, but based in Brussels and serving as the Executive Director at the Foundation for Global Governance and Sustainability, which he co-founded in 2013. And people will see the banner over his shoulder in the background. And Georgios is going to be speaking to us today on the general topic, or on the theme of rethinking global governance and education through the prism of COVID. So Georgios, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll mute myself. I'll keep my video on, but I'll mute myself, and look forward to hearing you.
Thank you very much, Alistair. It's good to reconnect with you. We had a lot of opportunities in the past to talk about UN reform, the framework of ACONS that you were leading as Executive Secretary, right? And or Executive Director, I don't remember the exact title. But it was, yeah, very nice. And always I try to combine also myself this dual identity of being an academic and a practitioner, which is also the idea about ACONS, Academic Council of the UN System, to bring people together, to advance also innovation in global governance from experience and theory and academic research. So what I'm going to present to you today is more my work with the foundation, which is a continuation of the work that I did with the Global Sustainability Council, where we had as one of the members, Jim Balsillie. I don't know if there is any connection, I'm sure there is, to the name of your school there. Yeah, he was one of the members, the Canadian member, and represented in a way the private sector on our panel, which eventually came up with a report before Rio+20. The report was entitled Resilient People, Resilient Planet, A Future Worth Choosing. And it suggested in its governance chapter the creation of the SDGs, and I gave a framework about those. So yeah, everything is connected, and we can see the connections later, but I'm very happy to be with you and to present what I'm doing in the last few years here in Brussels, but working with the whole world. The title is Rethinking Global Governance and Education Through the Prism of COVID. A lot have changed in the last year, and in terms of what we're doing at FOGS, the Foundation for Global Governance Sustainability, has been a good period for us in a way, I'm sorry to admit, because we could do with few resources and using electronic media to involve a lot of people in brainstorming sessions, producing reports, and thinking that we have an impact and an opportunity, a window of opportunity to think afresh about old things, because the COVID prism is really overwhelming in a way, and everybody is willing now to think a bit out of the box. The mission of FOGS, very quickly, is to develop and promote a grand narrative of hope for a people-centered, planet-friendly, inclusive, and sustainable globalization in a rapidly evolving world. It's a mouthful, but to help address major global challenges through a revamped global governance system and engaged, responsible, and informed global citizens, very important, active citizens, to ensure that the rapid and transformative technological and digital advances contribute to a more just and equitable world with a better life for all people. And we have our normative framework, which includes this grand narrative that you see also behind me on the roll-up, and the hexalog, which is a set of 6 principles. Hexalog, again, a Greek word, I'm sorry for that, which has 6 basic principles. So the grand narrative is an attempt to have a new narrative for globalization, which is not based on the profit-making tenet of the current globalization, which destroys people, increases inequalities, and reaches very few people, and has led to a lot of the problems that we are facing today, also with the environment and with others. The increase in populism, etc., nationalism, because people are reacting to it. There is a lot of insecurity and a lot of precarity. People feel uncertain about their future. And of course, the pandemic has made that even more prominent. So we want a grand narrative that explains challenges and binds the world, meaning it's a paradigm that explains what has been happening, challenges the status quo, and binds the world in the future, a positive narrative of hope, as we also call it. And the basic principles that we use as our framework, our normative framework, is harmony within humanity and with the planet. States and international organizations are there to service the people and not to claim sovereignty over people and abuse people. Human diversity and tolerance, mobility and restraint. This means we have rights, we have responsibilities, we have to accept the diversity of humanity. Migration, we have to solve that issue, and many other things. There is an annotated version of this, but these are the headlines. The economy at the service of humanity also, it's often the other way around. At the moment, still the case. Even with COVID, even with what's happening with the vaccines, etc., we seem to have the profit motive above all else. By the way, today there was a positive development in the European Union. Maybe they will declare invalid or something. They open up the patents of some of the vaccines, like the AstraZeneca one, so that others can also manufacture it and can be distributed quickly. Science and technological progress linked to society. Science can go to Mars by itself, but it has to carry society with it when it tries to do things that upset people, ways of working and thinking, etc. So artificial intelligence, all that, we have to see the repercussions for society. And engage global citizens, that's very important. People have to speak out, have to be knowledgeable, and have to participate, because otherwise they cannot complain that they are not, let's say, taking into consideration their wishes. And all this in the digital context that we have, all the social media and everything. It's a complicated world, but we're trying to create some points of reference, and we base our work, then the more practical things that you will see now, on that. So we have 3 areas of activity: global governance, global sustainability, and global citizenship. And I'm starting from global sustainability because it's something that we will not speak extensively about today, but the other 2 will explain more. Here we try to have partnerships with local civil society in countries to review their SDG implementation and to see what gaps are there, promote good practices. And we are doing that in Greece and India, where we have several activities with partners. We have webinars. We try to see how do you get from the SDGs as a concept, UN mandated thing, the 2030 agenda, through European and national legislation or strategies to actually having the end consumer or user of that, the citizen, feel the improvement and get hold of what the concepts and of what are the rights and responsibilities in that respect. So we see that there are gaps, usually between national and local authorities, between the various stakeholders like the private sector, the non-governmental sector. They are not connected, the public sector, to align their activities towards achieving the SDGs. Some of them know the rhetoric, but not the substance, etc. We're trying to, when we discover these gaps, we try to fill them also with webinars, as I said before, simulations for younger people, reports, etc. And going to the rest is global governance. Our work there is under this program UN to 100. We want the UN from 75 that it is now, 75 years old that it turned recently, sorry, to reach 100 if there is a reason for that and if there is usefulness in what it does. So we want to ensure that by offering disruptive alternatives for a modern, effective, ethical, and people-centered United Nations. And we'll talk about this governance innovation through the prism of COVID in more detail. We have done all this work, various webinars and brainstorming sessions and policy papers that we have issued. Global citizenship. The main program here is about education, which is the second topic that I'll talk in more detail shortly. It's COVIDEA, or COVIDEA for some, is the COVID Education Alliance that we have co-established with the P4TT, the Platform for Transformative Technologies, FOGS and P4TT, to build on digital technologies and new pedagogies to transform education systems for happy and productive lives in a sustainable future. Our goal is always the individual and of course the communities to increase the well-being and to have more resilience and sustainability. Just to complete the picture of FOGS, we also have an online magazine, Katoikos, and we invite you to write if you want, not academic articles, up to 800 words, like commentary or informative pieces for a broader audience, but people who are interested, and we have a youthful audience and a set of authors, usually young people, but not only. And we're all young, as Alistair said, I think young at heart at least. We have outreach and communication through FOGS, the FOGS website, Katoikos YouTube channel, newsletter, articles, video series like Director's Cut, Change Makers around the world, webinars, social media. And I'm going now to one of the two main areas, which is the global governance area and what we do there in terms of innovation through the prism of COVID. And we had these brainstorming sessions that led to several policy papers. Here is a graph from one of them, because what we discovered was a disappointing performance of the UN during the COVID period, and I'm afraid it still continues. I've not seen any major improvement, but initially the UN was at a loss. There were some problems, some cases of COVID among the delegations in New York, that they stopped everything. They didn't have a way to really pass decisions, the General Assembly or resolutions, the Security Council even. The Secretary General was appealing and appealing, but there was nothing happening. And I think they missed an opportunity there to prove the usefulness of the UN, because at that time we were saying there is need for a narrative of hope. You can see it here, a narrative of hope, resilience, and human well-being. We need that strongly, but it's not just to say, be hopeful, this will be a passing difficulty, this pandemic, but we wanted to put substance to it for a lasting improvement with a new economy for people and the planet, keeping an eye on the state of the world that the UN should be doing more systematically. Health as a global public good, it's not just another activity or commercial or otherwise. a resilient and equitable economic system as a global public good also. You cannot have the economic collapse with every such event like a pandemic, etc. There have to be ways to keep people going and at least able to survive during this period. And you have to know what you do with the companies, etc., what they should have in reserves, what help they can ask for. Cyberspace as a global commons also, because that's where we all live to a large extent now and work in cyberspace, but the rules are not there yet to know clearly that you have your rights, freedom of speech, and also that you will not be cheated, you will not be robbed of anything in cyberspace. Convening the world, we're saying, and talking to the Office of the Secretary General, what about an emergency online summit of world leaders? Why isn't the Secretary General convening it? There was at some point a financing for development event that was hosted online by the Prime Minister of Canada, if I remember correctly, and perhaps the Jamaican Prime Minister, one from the Caribbean leader, and the Secretary General. But that was not what could have been done from the start. Come together, world leaders. Don't go your separate ways trying to avoid the repercussions only for your people. Come together and let's see how we can deal with this together. It's the common enemy that could unite us, but it didn't, like climate change didn't. But anyway, another missed opportunity, we'll see. Maybe it will turn out differently. So the Secretary General could have convened more global expertise, and the President of the General Assembly convened the UN system in a more coordinated way, activation of the intergovernmental bodies also in a more coordinated way. Because WHO in a way was left alone, then the Bretton Woods institutions tried to deal with the economic crisis, but yeah, no clear plan. What about the International Labour Organization, Food and Agriculture? All did their small thing, but not in a very coordinated way. Eventually, they did have a meeting of the CEB, the UN systems chief executives under the Secretary General met, and that was something, but it took a long time, and we were pushing for it. Supporting countries and vulnerable groups, with the recovery plans, with the country teams, right? Funding and support to vulnerable groups and conflict zones. All these places would suffer under normal circumstances, normal anyway. With the pandemic, things are even worse there, and countries are indebted and all that. Reasserting the UN system as a leader in global governance, identification of core functions. We thought that the UN could find the opportunity to get a more long-term business continuity plan and focus on what are the core issues, which for me, they're not exactly the operational issues of development, at least in the development field, but are the normative issues, the convening role. But yeah, you'll tell me afterwards whether you think those were exercised in the right way. And of course, sources of finance. You have now still the UN people working from home. It is not clear whether they should be getting, let's say, their salaries for New York while they are somewhere at home with minimal expenses. The coordination is not always easy. Yeah, we have to see what are the long-term effects. The change in the US government makes things easier because before the UN was close to bankruptcy also. At some point, there was not enough cash to pay almost the employees. They just made it. Now it will be hopefully easier, but the long-term issues are not solved. And the two big things that we're pushing for now is a narrative of hope, as I said also before. What give the people a new dream, a new vision to implement, not to keep it only as a dream, but which talks about global public goods, about rights and responsibilities, about ways to get to them, even under conditions of a pandemic. And this is not over, and we have to get used to it and other disruptions probably. So what is that unifies humanity? Now we're working with people to shape it. We didn't want to come with a fixed narrative. We know the perimeter, whatever, we know the main elements, we know the normative framework of the Hexalog, as I said before, but the details, we're working with even indigenous peoples who are starting to work because they have a wisdom of ages about how to deal with nature, etc., and with society. We're working with artists, another approach to life and well-being, etc. And we are trying to involve all other stakeholders and groups of society in our formulation of this. And please be part of it. It's not our prerogative only to do it. And another more concrete thing, we're proposing a Global Resilience Council. Resilience now, it's a word that it has been overused probably. We started using it earlier ourselves. I happen to be also an engineer in addition to having a PhD in international relations. I'm a mechanical engineer, and my specialization was in nuclear engineering for CANDU type reactors, Canadian type nuclear reactors with heavy water. So I want to see, in addition to the theory, also the practice and implementation. And in this case, we tried with our team here, and we have Haris Gleckman, who is part of our team for global governance on FOX, a member of our board now, executive board, our president, Richard Kinley, who is the former Deputy Executive Secretary of UNFCCC, Yoriko Yasukava, former UN Resident Coordinator and Regional Director. So we have Verle van der Verde from UNDP, UNEP. We have many UN people, and we are trying to play a bit of a role that, for me, the UN should be playing, encouraging innovative thinking and moral and normative approaches, but we feel now freer outside to be doing it ourselves. The idea of the Global Resilience Council is you cannot solve any of the problems the way we're going. Climate change, UNFCCC, yes, Glasgow, everybody will start talking about it again and will say the next COP will be the COP. I even heard Secretary Kerry of the US, who is the special envoy for climate action, saying that. Not again. I mean, UNFCCC has limits. They can negotiate a bit more Article 6 about markets or whatever and mechanisms, but implementation cannot be done by UNFCCC, does not have the mandate, does not have the right people negotiating. It's mainly environment and climate people there from the corresponding ministries and some foreign affairs people. They are not able to tell the economy ministries, the ministries of industry, etc., and finance, do this and that to really address the core, the root causes of climate, for example, or of the pandemic, which has a lot of aspects, not only health, but also economic and with nature, how it started and things like that. So we need a body which will not be part of the specialized UN system bodies that we have now, but you will be able to elevate a global governance issue like climate, like a pandemic, to that body when it cannot be handled by the single specialized body. And there, what we propose is a subsidiary body of the whole UN system. So it will be a subsidiary body of the General Assembly of the UN, but also it can be adhered to and somehow get connected to the assemblies of WHO, UNESCO, UNIDO, IAEA, the IMF, etc., assemblies or corresponding bodies, so that all of them see it as part of their organization also. And this body, while being subsidiary at the same time, will be superior, something like a security council for the, what we call human security area, right? For let's say, weapons related problems and security threats. We have more details. You can find some already on our website. We're working on future or more detailed drafts. And we hope to have also the expertise and the ideas and the goodwill of other people who will come in. And Alistair knows more about it. So I can respond afterwards to questions if you want, how we envisage it, but it should be able to really have an authority to tell the specialized agencies what to do in their respective areas so that the whole addresses the global challenge in question. Also, it could tell governments and states to do things, and if they don't, there could be some kind of sanctions. And this body would be an opportunity to innovate also in the participation in global governance institutions. So the European Union and the African Union could be represented as regional bodies with their states under them in a way so as to have also some coordination, levels of coordination for implementation. The other issue of education in COVID. COVIDEA, the COVID Education Alliance, came up as an idea to the colleagues from P4TT when they saw here in Belgium that schools could not operate because they were closed because of COVID, and then they saw that there were problems even here of connectivity, etc. And we said, wow, what will happen? We have to rethink education with the digital technologies. But it became much bigger in the process because we saw that education is not really, has not changed for the last 50 or 60 years, or from the nation state days when it was used to consolidate the current states. And it's not ready to give people the tools that are, and the skills and the knowledge, but also the kind of thinking that will help them and survive and live good lives and prosper and help their societies be sustainable and resilient. So yeah, we started thinking big about COVIDEA then, and folks came in with its philosophy that I have explained to you earlier, to build on digital technologies and new pedagogies to transform education systems for happy and productive lives in a sustainable future. What you see here is this infographic. We see the preconditions. There has to be lifelong learning. You cannot finish now a degree and expect for 60 years afterwards to be doing the same things, or 40, I don't know. For work, society, and self-improvement, you have to learn all the time and be adaptable, not just for the market, but for yourself also. Of course, you need to have good connection, safe connection. But what are the purposes of education overall? It's not just to build knowledge, which often is accumulation of knowledge and no judgment. You have to also build character, especially to young people who are starting their lives, to build judgment, to build resilience, individual and societal. You have to build social awareness and responsible citizenship. So these are the purposes of education that we try to summarize, at least for us. And we have all these stakeholders here playing a role in it, from teachers to education ministries, of course, and parents and professional associations, and of course the pupils, the students themselves, lifelong learners, older people, employers. What do they need? What do they want? How they support education, educational establishments, the community, and international organizations also. And so you can use search engines, other digital tools, etc., with some criteria to personalize learning and to also teach the teachers and introduce new pedagogies. But what you want is a new educational mindset, really, an active citizen engagement in society and the economy and individual well-being, as we said before, and to achieve the SDGs, right, which is a comprehensive vision for a better future. The two big things that we're trying here within the COVIDEA overall approach that I just explained is to create a digital education Agora, online the city in cyberspace, basically, where you go, you have an avatar, you enter the cafe, you say what your issue is, or you bring a question, or you bring a good practice in education, then others come around you, you discuss it. If you don't know, you want to refer to things, you go to the nearby library, again, virtual. You have sections on how to build character, how to build judgment, how to teach physics, how to teach laboratory sciences digitally. And you pick up the curated volumes, or you do a research with artificial intelligence. Then you can go also to a digitarium where you can see a projection of a video which tells you each particular technology, what good things can offer for education in any or all of these educational purposes. So for how 3D virtual reality or augmented reality and technologies, what can they help, how can they help you teach geography and history, but also laboratory sciences, which you wouldn't think you could do. This is under construction, the digital education Agora. It will have other sections of stakeholders, offices, and companies who want to promote their new education-related products, but they should accept some kinds of criteria based on these purposes of education. And we want also to proceed with country pilots, which means we're working with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, who are preparing a roadmap, working with countries to see how technology can help them achieve the SDGs. And SDG 4 is the education SDG. We want to be part of that, and we're working with them to go and help at least 10 countries initially to rethink their education systems, what they teach, how they teach it, etc. For the next, for the future, but bringing all this expertise and ideas and the Agora also, and all that. That was it from me. Thank you. I hope you're still awake, and I'm ready to discuss further.
Thanks, Georgios. Just so people know, Eric will be watching the chat function and also looking for anybody who wants to ask some questions to Georgios. While people are thinking about that, Georgios, you did tell us a little bit throughout about the connection of the work of FOGS to the SDGs, and you were just talking there at the end about the education SDG. How does the grand narrative for FOGS, how does that build on or differ from the SDGs as a vision exercise? And is the audience the same as the audience for the, is your vision, or is your audience, sorry, individual citizens, if the SDGs audience is really states and trying to get them in a direction? How do the two things connect to each other?
Very good question, thank you. Because we're struggling with it. Are we introducing a new vision that perhaps competes with the 2030 agenda? And we didn't want that, to be honest. But what we're thinking exactly is SDGs sometimes, or the 2030 agenda, are a bit UNEs for people. They're mostly addressed to countries and perhaps academics, but not to the average person. So we wanted to connect more to a story, the narrative as a story, which is more coherent, and it's not, and there is a fragmentation, of course. On top of the SDGs, there is the narrative of the 2030 agenda, leaving no one behind and all other things. But we thought that that has to be stressed, the human element. So we also thought that we should infuse some vitality into the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, because they can become like dry, I don't know, technocratic or enumeration things. So that's it. It's not competing. It's interpreting perhaps that for a broader audience, and also enriching it with human stories in a way about things. Yeah.
Okay. And one other question, and this kind of links two different questions that I was thinking of. There is an audience that is receptive. There's an audience that is interested. There is an audience, that looks at multilateralism and global cooperation in a constructive way. And FOGS and other things can work with them, but to some extent that's preaching to the choir, because the other audience is the audience that we've seen over the last few years and still see of QAnon, of conspiracy theory, that this is all a way that George Soros and Bill Gates want to take over the world and that sort of thing. So the populist, nationalist, nativist, anti-globalist, conspiracy theorist audience, and unfortunately there's a lot of that. But how do you try to reach them in a way that also does not, number one, get them to know that this exists, but then number two, engage them in a way that does not have them look at this as another iteration of what they think is a plan to take over the world?
It is a plan to take over the world, so, but anyway.
We won't tell them.
Don't tell them. Well, we do that exactly. I have to tell you about my background, right? That I'm a Spartan, you noticed before. Come from Sparta, Greece, a village outside. And in my village, many people have these conspiracy theories as their paradigm of thinking in a way, because they feel that they are so powerless to change anything. So whatever is happening to them, one bad thing after another, because they are producers like my mother. My father is no longer there, but my mother produces oranges and olives in a village outside Sparta. Small places, beautiful valley, but cut off from the world in a way. And they see only the bad impacts of things that others decide for them. And in a way, that was also my motivation when I was growing up there, that I didn't like my father and mother to be subject to these devaluations of the currency or wars in Cyprus, etc., that affected us without us being able to do anything. So I can understand them. And I think several of us, we should go back to the root causes why people react in a bad way. And also criticize also those who are converted. For me, they're not always converted. So I would say there are at least 3 categories of people. What I've seen in practice also at the UN, some of those who speak about win-win situations, they're either dishonest or a pie in the sky, or it works for them and they think everything is win-win. It's not win-win for everybody. So if it's win-win for Gates, and he has all this money and he can influence health systems in Africa, he's also undermining, when he focuses on tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS, let's say the preparedness with full health systems for other eventualities and other problems. So this enlightened, self-assured and rich and leftist at the same time elite is not ideal to persuade the others, because they see that the inequalities increase, they are always at the losing end, and those who are talking about the good of the world, they are enriching themselves and influencing them more and more in ways that they don't appreciate. So, of course, crazy then conspiracies, because the politicians come in, like people like Trump and others, they take advantage of this, they spread even more, they want to become leaders, and we can have fascist phenomena again and leaders of that kind. That is really dangerous. But I think the root cause that unites really, in a way, the left and the right of the average person is that precarity. And I have this friend, Professor Asmanova, Albena Asmanova from the Brussels School of International Studies, University of Kent. She wrote a book, Capitalism on Edge, and precarity is a big word there. She thinks that the bigger problem is not so much the increase in inequalities, but the first thing is this sense of insecurity, that people don't control their futures, that they cannot see an improvement over time of their lot and of their children's lives anymore. That's it. So that can lead to extremes. And if you don't trust anybody, suddenly you trust crazy things. Yeah. So I think that those who are really, who believe in this for the future, the positive things, have to differentiate also from the extremes of those who are converted in a self-serving way. And I do that. It doesn't help the funding of our foundation or my career perhaps, but I don't care, honestly. I think there has to be some kind of bravery shown by also academics to speak honestly about things. Yeah.
Thanks, Georgios. I'm going to hand it over to Eric, because Eric's, I see there are questions coming up from the audience. So Eric, I'll hand it over to you and I'll mute myself.
Yes, sure. There are some questions that have come up in the chat, and I'll just mention now that you can raise your hand in the audience if you have a question, and I'll direct things to you so that you can speak your question to Georgios directly, or you can type it out in the chat and I'll read it on your behalf. While I give people a chance to think of questions, I have one of my own also. Georgios, you mentioned that if there was interest, you'd be willing to expand a little bit more on the UN to 100 initiative, and specifically sort of the mechanisms there. And I am quite interested in that, specifically the sort of accountability or watchdog role you mentioned for the Global Resilience Forum. I'm just wondering in kind of a world where multilateralism seems to be on the decline, and states have long sort of sought to keep the UN powerless and fragmented, how do you envision a role for a more sort of effective UN that can hold states accountable? Thank you.
Sure, great, thanks, Eric. What we say is that first of all, the UN should have watch the pulse of the world, meaning should be following the basic metrics of the planet and of the people, not only the planet, because another thing, what we're saying before, the win-win people can focus more on climate. Suddenly, climate is everything. No, the social issues, inequalities, and all that are equally important. So if the UN, we have proposed it in one of our policy papers, every 6 months came out with a report, the state of the planet, or a year, and more frequently if necessary for urgent things. The Secretary General, using all the capacity of the system, right, and the expertise in the specialized agencies, saying that these are the indices for inequalities increasing, let's say, right, planetary boundaries broken and all this, then it would create a sense of, oh, the UN is watching for us, watching out there for us. And then the Secretary General, for now only he, but anyway, she hopefully in the future, can go to the Security Council under Article 99 and say, bring to the attention of the Council an issue which is of paramount importance and threatens international peace and security. International, let's say, as we said, human security may be threatened by some of these things. The Secretary General should go and say, this has to, warrants the convening of the Global Resilience Council because of this and that, and propose things, right? So one way is that, one is to keep track of the problems and quantify them and explain them. The second is convening the council or asking for it to be convened. And the third is, once it is convened, then it becomes more intergovernmental again. But it has to be, we foresee some kind of overall body that then can meet in specific, for specific issues with specific ministerial, let's say, compositions, and can also call in, of course, the scientists, all, again, the stakeholders, the relevant groups to advise, but also to be part of the process so that they will eventually implement any decision and can be held accountable also. So it's not like we have a pandemic, bring together all the pharmaceuticals of the world, not only of the Western world, by the way, and say, accept that you won't raise the price above that, or work together for, there are basically two kinds of vaccines. Work together to make one of it's perfect or something, or whatever. Use these groups to test, and that should have been done somehow, and it was not done. Nobody does it. I think it's, the European Union is trying now to do the convening in its own space, and buying, etc. There is COVAX from WHO, but somehow they are competing with each other. They're asking for more money all the time, and everybody's trying to take advantage of the situation. So all this should be systematically followed and reported and criticized also from the Secretary General's office. For me, that was always a more supranational element of the current United Nations global governance system, which in the past, perhaps with Dag Hammarskjöld or even Kofi Annan partly, we felt was there. But again, we have returned to a very timid approach, no new ideas perhaps, or fear of introducing anything new, and just an attempt to get re-elected from the current Secretary General also, that I don't think is ideal. Be brave and serve one term, but bring about some change in the way people think and act.
That's great, thank you. We have some very interesting and important questions here in the chat about the education aspect of FOG's work. Two of them are sort of interrelated, so I'll give you two at once. One is, could you comment on sort of the implications of rising tuition costs in many countries and sort of the decrease in access to education? How will that impact your organization's education initiatives? And then another one is about digital trends. Janelle is wondering if this sort of more digital heavy education will meet all the needs of students. Right now, high school students who are learning mostly online are feeling isolated, depressed, and having trouble finding meaning in their lives. And do you think that digital spaces can necessarily meet those kinds of mental and emotional challenges that students are facing right now and may continue to face in the future?
Oh, great. Yes, the fees issue is very specific. We've not dealt with it, but we do understand in our way that there is always a central role for the state in education systems. And in many constitutions, there is the responsibility of the state to provide free or at cost education. Yeah, I think it should be even easier with the digital means, because you don't have all the expenditure associated with the regular running of a university. We see now in England, where the universities are a big business, they are trying to rethink their model. Why should anybody from the other end of the world pay the amounts that they're asking? Because if you're outside of, before the European Union, etc., you would pay a lot more tuition fees while you're still doing everything online, right? So that is also challenging the model that exists now. But I think, yes, the model of the US, for example, where you get indebted and you come out with a big debt as a student, in order to then you have to pay your debt and you are asking for exorbitant salaries, etc., is just how can you say, an inflation of everything, which together with Wall Street, etc., it doesn't make sense. In Europe, we're keeping that low, and I think in Canada the same, right? There is a responsibility of the state to allow people to get as far as they can with their capacities in education. And even if they have to pay some fees, they can be waived or they can be covered by others. I think that's the model to go. The US should rethink. The Ivy League schools, of course, you pay there for the networking more than anything, I think. But and the model of people getting indebted from the very start. For me and for many people in Europe, it's just your parents pay, or you get a small scholarship and you get by and you finish the university. Yeah, so I think it's a matter of people, also students, academics, to stop this kind of inflation. And there are so many good schools in the US, also the state systems, that are very good and reasonably priced, I would say. So anyway, it's not part of our exact, but we work with the main authorities and with private if they want to pass our philosophy. Digital trends. They don't cover, of course, our needs, right? And for us that are used to interacting in a human way, it's even more difficult, I think. I was asking friends, kids who are like 10, 11, 12, can you make new friends? Because for me now, it's partly easy to maintain my friendships online. And sometimes I have reconnected with people I wouldn't see easily because I wouldn't fly to their place easily. But to create new friendships, difficult. For them, they say yes. By playing games together or other ways of socializing, they say yes. I don't know how deep it is. I'm sure there is a human aspect that is not covered, but it may not be as bad as we think. But gamification and other ways of education are introduced more with digital means, and there are people with their avatars. They can meet and do things together. But of course, it's not everything, of course. So we are not for going digital completely, not. But we think that even in a classroom, you can have all these means and together have a virtual reality, and you learn history much differently, I suppose, if you are in ancient Rome or Sparta or Athens, surrounded by all this, than just listening to somebody boringly reciting. Yeah, so I mean, this is not a project only for the digital conditions of today. It's for a return also to a more human interaction style, but it is more about building the character and building also the judgment to tell fake news from not fake news, because also this use of digital means has confused us about reality. And all these QAnon conspiracies also thrive in the on the internet, and there are dark sides of the internet where you have also crime, etc., the dark internet. People, like they are in a way trained not to be cheated when they go to a market or when they walk, not to be robbed. They should get the skill to be able to judge also in a digital world. And that we have prominently there. Also, there are technologies that are scary sometimes. There is in China, let's say, used extensively. You are watched by a camera while you are in a classroom or from home when you are learning from home. And then that can say that if you're looking down or you are blinking your eyes too often or whatever, whether you absorb or not the lesson and you participate or not, as you should, in the learning process. The first time I heard it, I said, oh my God, if they do it in China, probably they're trying to see whether, I don't know, people are spied upon. All right, there is also this West-China cultural divide. But they say also if experienced psychologists see it, they can help somebody to get over their timidity or to get over a problem and say, oh, for some reason, for physics, you're doing this, you don't understand. Perhaps there has to be another way to teach you physics, or it may not be your area. So there are dual use technologies for everything, and for digital technologies for education, you have to be careful, but they could help, I suppose. Finally, the artificial intelligence thing, of course, there are biases included in every algorithm. And so even explanations of these moves of lips or eyelids of people and other things may be made from a perspective of a certain culture, etc., background. So we have to be very cautious to understand that artificial intelligence can be moving very fast, but it's based on an algorithm prepared by some people who may have a gender, cultural, whatever other bias. So yeah, we're trying to create criteria. We're even working with a group of companies and an initiative of companies to see how they could go beyond CSR, corporate social responsibility, and adopt some criteria for education in terms of their outputs. Content, but also connectivity and other things to minimize this element of bias and bad results. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. We have two additional questions that both raise the issue of global citizenship that you brought up in your talk. The first one is more of a broad one, which is how do we sort of build a common understanding of a global citizen that fits within different idiosyncratic societies with different cultures and politics and social traditions. And the second one is a more directed question about how is FOGS targeting, you mentioned the need for a coordinated effort among, WHO, Bretton Woods institutions, the ILO, and how is FOGS approaching that kind of coordinated initiative specifically regarding global citizenship?
Right. Wow, thank you. How to build a common understanding of global citizenship, that's important, and we have to go back to the roots in a way. In Europe, we say unity in diversity because Europe cannot work otherwise. We're very diverse, we had wars here, we speak different languages. If anything, the European model, let's say, is closer to India integration, which is a very also mixed, diverse and messy universe. The world is even more so. So there are different backgrounds, different ways of thinking, but if you go to big history in a way, that's where it helps. You know Harari, right? Yuval Noah Harari, Homo sapiens, and Sapiens is the book, and etc. There you see that we have common roots. And of course, although we are different, I mean, the differences can be classified in categories that are understandable. I mean, we are different in food, but I can eat Chinese and Japanese and Thai food and whatever other food. So a lot of that diversity is to be celebrated and to make life interesting, from food to stories to whatever, dances and theater and all these things. The core elements of humanity, though, are the same. And that's where we go to build something that is a global citizenship founded on bedrock of commonality, right? So we want to talk more about that because member states of the UN and nation states have created their identities against others usually. There is diversity all over and they try to paper over it. Like the French are supposed to be a unified state, right? From the kings to the revolution, they're supposed to all speak French and whatever, be a unified nation. And we see that they are not, and very good for them. I mean, it's like there is Bretagne, there is Occitanie, and there is a lot of other, Corsica and all these places with their own traditions, and they're coming back. They have not died. Even in a place, a small like Greece, in my area, there is a small population speaking something closer to ancient Spartan than modern Greek, which is more the Athenian, going through the Macedonian, simplified dialect for the Empire of Alexander. So modern Greek is the imperial Greek simplified for the empire, and with more an Athenian Ionian context, while still populations speak some of the ancient ways of speaking Greek on islands or even in Sparta in the mountains, etc. I find that exciting. But in the past, if you went to a school, they would tell you, you're not supposed to speak this. What is this? Speak proper Greek, let's say, or speak proper French, or speak whatever. The big effort has been made. It's perhaps understandable when empires were falling apart and national identities were being formed. But now we have to get over these identities, not to discard them. It's very interesting, again, that you feel part of a Canada, which is also bilingual. It has the provinces, right? I remember correctly, it has a lot of diversity, and First Nations and later nations and other things. But at the same time, it has a commonality of humanity that is shared. And that's where we want to build this. And we all need food, and we all need affection, and we all need, let's say, some kind of security to survive. And either we guarantee it to each other, or we mess it up for each other, for all of us. As simple as that. And then the coordinated efforts of WHO, etc., to create global citizenship. I worked for 2 years with the Secretariat of the CB, which is the Chief Executive's Board for Coordination of the UN system. And I was the focal point for climate change under Ban Ki-moon at the time. So we tried to see how to make a common understanding, to have a common understanding between UNDP, UNEP, the World Bank and others on acting to address climate change. And it was not easy even that, because each one of them was looking for money from often the same sources, from the Norwegians, from the Swedes, from the Canadians, to finance their projects. There was competition, and even when they were talking about things that were needed in common for climate action, they could not come together to do something about forests and climate action, for example. But eventually, we created UN RED, reduction of emissions from deforestation, forest degradation, with several agencies, for example. And that was good. There are other like joint ventures. What is behind that is also the ministries, because now we have this fragmentation of organizations. But then when, let's say, UNESCO is the Ministries of Education, WHO is the Ministries of Health, UNIDO is the Ministries of Industry, whatever there is, and UNDP is more like the International Development Ministries, all that UNEP Environment Ministries, the governments and everybody, they have different mentalities, and they have different budgets, and they have different priorities. It cannot work like that, and but you need a strong leadership in the center. And what we tried to do through the CB Secretariat was to enable the Secretary General, who does not have the authority over other agency heads, but has the moral prestige as first among equals, to create common narratives and to include the others. But then you have also the member states in each of these organizations to approve the budgets and allocate the resources in a way that is complementary, complements each other, and they have projects that they can jointly develop. So there is a lot of work to be done, but a strong leadership with a strong vision creates also some kind of a moral constraint upon others. If it is demanded, they will find ways to do it. Otherwise, they can tell you, oh, you know, our assembly in their budget, whatever, they have not foreseen this, so I'm sorry, our organization cannot participate. And then you go to a country team where the UN system is supposed to deliver as one, but they do their own small things, and the resident coordinator, despite the changes, cannot have an influence if they don't have resources and some kind of strong moral authority and vision. So yeah, what we want to do is a citizenship of agencies also. And I'm sorry, agencies are not there forever. Yeah, I mean, if we create this Global Resilience Council, there has to be a much more integrated global governance system. Otherwise, you have the G20 also trying to create their own secretariat. Now they may start creating their own agencies. I don't know, whatever. You have OECD and others. If we don't have a global body of global legitimacy and we let this die because of bad coordination of the system that exists, we will be in trouble. And we don't have the hegemon that was holding it together in the past. The US has its own problems internally. So we need a common vision, strong vision and leadership, more collective. And also each person has to play their role. Yeah. So I don't know, I mean, that's what we're pushing for. We are not responsible for all this, fortunately or unfortunately. And we have a niche approach and idea that we want to push through our executive board members, advisory board members, academics, friends, etc., network. And we can take the network, how can I say, influence as much as it goes. But for now, we cannot impose. But we're doing other things with the people also. We want to mobilize the citizens so that they demand this from their politicians, right? So personally, I'm now involved with the Greens in Greece, to be honest, to see how it works in practice. Also, a new way of doing politics. There are the ecologists and Greens from the past. Some of them are stuck to old ways, but with some people who are new in politics, we're also trying to see how to really reconceive and relaunch politics with a practical approach and with the SDGs there and common narratives there and local solutions also there. Because for some things, globalization is not good. And we have to say, for some things, if we insist as UN or others that you have to allow these big supply chains to continue, when something happens and they get disrupted, you panic, you don't have masks, you don't have other equipment, because you have destroyed your local capacity. You don't even have food locally produced to eat. So a globalization that it is also based on localization, resilient local communities also, is the way to go. And a common narrative uniting all this.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that comprehensive
answer. Vote for me. Yes, after this.
Georgios 2024. Yes, I think you've addressed almost all of the questions that I see in the chat here. So conscious of time, I think we realize it's the end of the day for you. So we're gonna start letting you go. I'll hand things back over to Alistair, but I just wanna thank you on behalf of everyone at the Multilateral Institutions Cluster for speaking with us today. This was really insightful, and you've left us with an increasingly rare and much needed message of hope. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing and for speaking to us today. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Georgios, yeah, let me add, number one, add my thanks. And it's really nice to see you again. And maybe when we get to a world in which travel is safe again, I will do my best to get you to come over and speak in person as well. For people who might want to follow up with you, so I'll ask you now, is it okay if they can email me and then I can pass them on to you?
Please, yes. You have my email
address. And in that context as well, you and I have already chatted elsewhere about the Global Resilience Council, and you know I'm interested in that. So I'll also reiterate or repeat to people that you are looking for engaged people, and perhaps some others who are on the call may be interested in reaching out to you about the council and its work as well.
We're going to invite you, Alistair, soon to be part of a brainstorming session, and then you can use the capacity before and after, inform your colleagues and see where we can take it. We want to start really pushing for it with academic brain power, but also bringing in ambassadors and others, civil society to push for it. Yeah.
That's perfect. Georgios, thanks very much, and stay safe. Thanks to the audience very much for great questions. And again, if any of you would like to contact Georgios and follow up, feel free to send me a message, and then I'll pass it on to Georgios as well. So thanks very much, everybody.
You. Really.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Enjoy your weekend.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.